Hi, my name is Molly Harnish. I'm a junior in Mason's Honors College. I'm studying economics and I'm minoring in math and public policy. And today I'm going to be presenting a proposal that I first started workshopping in Honors 361 in the fall of 2019. I submitted it to Oscar and got approval for funding for their undergraduate research scholars program this summer, which I'm really excited about. And finally, I hope to submit it as my undergraduate thesis and to continue working on this throughout my senior year. So without further ado, this is Who Owns the Forests? Economics is all about how people make choices between scarce resources. If resources weren't scarce, we wouldn't have to choose between them, but they are, and we do. Some of our most important resources come from our environment, and one of those environmental resources is forests. People have been interacting with forests for millennia. We've been cutting them down, planting them, shaping the landscape to meet our needs. So on a very broad level, my project asks, what factors affect how people use natural resources, particularly how people use forests? The literature suggests that one such factor is institutions. Now, we might think of institutions as organizations that are housed in buildings, but they're so much broader than that. They're not only agencies or organizations, but also customs, laws, generally the context in which you make decisions. So, in general, you can think of them as the spoken and unspoken rules that govern human behavior. Ownership is one such institution. Who owns a resource? You, your neighbor, your community, the state, the federal government has profound implications for how you use it. In each one of those situations, you're going to look at the resource differently, you're going to treat it differently. And that's basically what I want to get at with this question. So in the US, forest land is owned both publicly and privately. And one of the ways we can understand resource use for forests is through the timber industry. So with this project, I'm hoping to investigate the relationship between the amount of forest land that's publicly owned, so that's the institutional context, and the timber industry, that's how the resources are used. The share of forest land that's publicly owned varies greatly between US states. So in about half of them, as you can see here, 20 to 40% of forest land is state, federally owned, publicly owned, but it ranges widely from 6% of forest acreage in Texas to 96% in Nevada, which is a pretty big range. When I say public, I mean forests owned by the Bureau of Land Management, states, counties, and the federal government. And privately owned forests are typically owned either by families, individuals, or corporations. That's the distinction made, and I'm using data here from the US Forest Service. So not only is this a really wide range, 6% to 96%, but it also separates pretty neatly into regions. So the Pacific and Rocky Mountain regions tend to have more publicly owned forests than states classified as north or south. This makes it hard to compare ownership and the timber industry across all 50 states. If we try to determine how differences in public forest ownership affect the timber industry in each, we run into problems. If California's timber industry looks different from Massachusetts' timber industry, is that because of who owns the forests, or because California is a totally different state from Massachusetts with totally different forests and totally different history? A difference in difference analysis is a way to get around this problem and test this question. So that's what I'm going to be conducting. If ownership changes in one state because of a large government purchase or a new policy, then we can compare resource use in that state before and after the change to resource use in surrounding states before and after the change. So we're comparing the difference in the state, which experienced the policy change, to the difference in the surrounding region, which didn't. And specifically, we're comparing differences in the timber industry in each of these places. Such a dramatic change did happen with the Florida Preservation 2000 Act. This was an aggressive program of public land acquisition, providing 10 years of funding to purchase public lands from 1990 to 2000, and then it continued with the Florida Forever program beginning in July 2001. We can focus in on Florida and say, okay, Florida's ownership changed because of this program, and let's compare it to the rest of the Southeast. So first, let's take a look at Florida. Over time, the amount of publicly owned timberland, and when I say timberland, I just mean forest land used for timber, in Florida has increased, and it's mostly due to increases in state purchases and county purchases. The state is that pink section, and the county is the mustard section. And this is also interesting because you can see this is just acres. So you can also see the decrease in timberland and then the increase in recent years, which is interesting and another part of the proposal that I really want to look into. So next you can see Florida compared to the rest of the region. So the share of publicly owned timberland in Florida also increased far more than in other Southeast states over this time period. So now we're looking at the percent of total timberland that's publicly owned. It's been increasing since 1977, but it really took off after 1997 and broke away from the rest of the crowd at that point. So the rest of the Southeast region kind of, they've changed a little bit over this time period, but Florida has really broken away from the rest of the group. And this offers a really unique opportunity for a difference in difference analysis. We have something that changed in Florida. They started this program of public land acquisition. We have a region to compare it to as defined by the Forest Service, and the rest of that region didn't change really that much in terms of the share of their timberland that was publicly owned. So this is a really good opportunity for a difference in difference analysis that gets at this question. It's also important to note that the timber industry in Florida did change while increasing funding was devoted to this kind of land acquisition. So this starts in 1990, which is the first year that by industry data is available, and it goes until 2017, which is the last year recorded by the Forest Service. So I tried to line up the rest of the years, except for 1990, with the years where the Forest Service data is. So total annual wages and average annual pay in the private sector of Florida's logging industry rose, while employment and the number of establishments decreased even though more counties began reporting after 1997. So you can see that there's this change in the timber industry, these trends over time that I'm going to get into in more detail in my research project, but this kind of outlines the general direction. So to tie it all together, this is my research question. What is the relationship between the share of timberland owned publicly and private forest owners' timberland use, measured by annual wages, employment, and establishments in Florida? To answer this question, I plan to answer several smaller questions. First, I need to understand forest ownership in Florida better. Who exactly owned the land that Florida bought? In what counties did the transfer occur? And what are the characteristics of timber and timberland in Florida and the Southeast region? Once I have that kind of qualitative background understanding, I'm going to compile a data set from a variety of sources. So the U.S. Forest Service's Forest Inventory and Analysis database is going to be extremely helpful here, as well as the National Woodland Owners Survey, the Florida Forest Service, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. And then once I have that data, and that's going to be my main work over the summer, is getting that that background, and then working on building this data set. And then hopefully I'll continue into my undergraduate thesis and compile, once I have that data, I will conduct a difference in difference analysis that compares Florida's timber industry before and after its intensive program of public land acquisition with the logging industry in other Southeast states before and after that public land acquisition. So why does this matter? Because institutions matter. We don't make decisions in a vacuum. We make them surrounded by context, laws, and customs. We take these things into account, often without realizing them. So understanding how institutions affect decisions, in this case, how ownership affects resource use, has implications for both policymakers, maybe in other states who want to do something similar to what Florida's done here, and to landowners, to forest owners who are kind of wondering, how would such a policy affect my livelihood? It matters for both of them, and so with this project, I hope to contribute to this larger political economy question of the relationship between institutions and markets. This is, in a slightly different form, the question that I wrote my honors college admissions essay about. It's a really pertinent question, and it also ties to the question of how people interact with the environment and what that means. So I'm really excited and really fortunate to be able to begin this research project over the summer. I'm really excited about it. And along that vein, I want to conclude with some thanks. I couldn't have designed this proposal without a lot of help from Dr. Jason Dunick in the economics department and Mr. Richard Stafford in the honors college. Thank you both for your invaluable feedback throughout this whole process, for all your meetings with me, for encouraging me, for helping me to write this, and for the opportunity to continue working on this question. And I certainly couldn't have made this video without help from the Honors College communications team. Thank you to all of you for all of your hard work, and thank you for watching my proposal.